Thank you all so much for coming back out to join us. Last week, we ran out of time and had to hit the pause button, so let's hit play and jump right back into the good stuff. This is more of Jeff Scheel on the 11%. The cult of celebrity that we have specifically here in North America is effing bonkers. It is bananas. And man, I learned early on, take Christofferson, for example. If Chris is walking into a venue with a guitar in his hand, he's Mickey Mouse at Disneyland. He's mugged, and rudely so. People, they think they have this right to come up and invade your space. If I carry the guitar 10 feet in front of him, nobody gives him a second look, because that's the image he had, was the troubadour card, guitar carrying guy or whatever. But, and I keep in mind, I came on the scene in the 90s. After the 80s, the whole years of excess or whatnot were kind of a thing. But the right that people think they have, maybe it's follow you around in a grocery store and print what you borrowed, is just insane in our society. And the internet hadn't made it any easier.
And that's a whole nother issue. I mean, you can imagine, we talk about it in the band, because we're all friends. In fact, we were bouncing weird science photos. This is on Saturday night, and because we all, we're still really good friends, but we talk about it constantly. What it would have been like in the time of the internet, and it wasn't so much like a privacy thing. It's you talk about ownership. It's not necessarily about ownership too. It's like, put it this way, we knew people didn't like our band. People liked our band. There were people that didn't like our band. Fine with that. But now, I mean, it's like, it's interesting because I just saw an article on Blabbermouth with Josie Scott, who lives in Tulsa, from Saliva. And he was just talking about not doing, I'm sure some things were taken out of context in the interview. And he didn't, he doesn't want to do a Saliva, don't quote me on this. You got to go read the article yourself, because you don't want to misquote, don't want to misquote him. But, he was talking about not wanting to do a Saliva reunion because it wouldn't be with all the guys. And he just didn't feel, he's kind of fine doing what he's doing. And man, the amount of, it's like the amount of, hatred's a strong word.
People coming after
Yeah,
him.
and I'm like, the guy has his reasons. He's not paying your bills. And obviously you're not paying his. Because you don't, and, but you feel like you have the right to tell the world that, oh, this guy sucks, or this guy's a whatever, or, and there are people that are defending him, and which is great to see. But, that's the thing about the internet now. That's the thing that, because we kind of, sort of in the 90s, you had these, the chat, the sort of the message boards. That was the age of the message boards. And,
Yes.
and so you would get some hate there. But you didn't have these viral phenomenons that would happen. And, and so, cut to the guy sitting here talking to you now. The only legacy, I care about the legacy of the band for the people who cared about the band.
For sure.
And for the four guys, including myself, that was in the band, and people that worked hard. We talk about TBT Records. My manager, Gloria Butler. Sound like I'm giving a awards speech, but those people, all the people that worked hard, the people that worked hard at radio, the people that worked hard at retail, the people that, the people who were on street teams, if you remember those things.
Guerrilla marketing.
They would just volunteer their time and go out because they loved a band. And, they got some perks out of it. Maybe if, they came to the show, they got in the meet and greet, and there was those kinds of things. And, or they would get t-shirts and they get that kind of stuff. But, that's what to me, and that's maybe again back to third part of it, the 3-part question about legacy. It was like, all that stuff. I don't want to try to recreate what that was. Because one, we can't do it. Couldn't do it. We couldn't do it commercially. We couldn't. I'm not writing the same kind of songs. I'm not writing about the same topics. Maybe a little bit, but maybe the perspective has obviously changed, and I'm a little bit more willing to forgive myself now than I was at 30 years old. And so, that's the most important thing as far as the band's concerned. As far as me being a human being, if I keep that over here, in fact, I was talking to the Mortal Kombat guy. It was a writer who's writing an article about it, and I said, frankly, I've never watched the movie. I've seen that part of the movie where the songs in the movie, but I've never watched the movie. I haven't probably listened to that soundtrack since I got it in 1995. I don't go back, and I hadn't listened to till we were playing the show in 2023. I hadn't gone back and listened to Gravity Kills music at all. And I think it's, I try to be kind of healthy about all that. And, would I have liked for it to last longer? Absolutely. But now, 20 years after the band came to an end, 22 years, you can't go back and change any of it now, nor would I now, because, I waited to become a father. I wanted to be done. I made the conscious decision while I was in the middle of it. I was like, I don't want to be a dad, and I don't know that I'd have been a very good dad. Maybe I would have. Maybe I'm selling myself short, but, so you just, you look at what you have now, and I wouldn't trade. I mean, I can't imagine living without, like, my wife and, my daughter who's amazing, and my stepson who's amazing, and I have amazing extended family, and I'm able to live in the moment with these people. And that was something too, that what you did as well, it robs you of living in the present, because because you have so much going on. We talk about the water always boiling. I could be, because I was married previously, and I can't imagine being married to me back then, because I was never present.
I told my girlfriend the other day, she and I have been together a year and a half, a couple years. I said, I'm so glad I did not meet you at that time in my life. I wouldn't have been emotionally available. I wouldn't have been physically. My focus was I was pretty selfish, manipulative at the time. I wasn't proud of who I wasn't the best version of myself. But at the same time, I think you just hit the nail on the head earlier. I can forgive myself for that now. I'm a little more forgiving now than I was at 33.
Yeah, and when you can forgive yourself, now all of a sudden you can you give yourself not only permission to say, okay, I did that, and I can. It's not. I don't know that compartmentalize is the right term, but you can understand that was a period of your life that you can give yourself at least the credit for evolving at that point. And you can accept that evolution and be happy about it. And try not, and actually maybe not, regrets is a strong word. And, I guess I have a few regrets. Professionally, I have some regrets, and, personally, I have a lot of regrets too, but I don't dwell on any of those things anymore now. And again, I just, my wife and I, I'm in the moment all the time. And not saying that I don't have to plan for, the future, and I got to make sure I can pay my mortgage, and it's all that stuff. It's not.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't want to sound like I'm just like I'm here and now all the time, but like when you're a younger man, you're really trying to create success. And we both, maybe our ideas of success, are very different when you're 30. Um,
Oh yeah. I told my daughter the success I thought I'd have didn't look anything like the success I had, and I consider
mhm.
myself successful, but and I couldn't have planned any. It had to happen the way it did. But for me, it's almost like my daughter's mom. She and I get along well. We're one of those couples, very close, and we will tell people we were meant to be married when we were married, and we're not meant to be married now. That was part of our life that happened as it should have, and now our lives are happening as they should. And I try to look at the professional side of it the same way. Like I was doing the things I needed to do at the time, and I would do things differently. And most of the folks that I I never really burned a bridge, but I handled situations that I would have probably handled differently now. But that's also, it's that way with anything in life. It's not exclusive to being an
No,
artist or in the
no, I mean,
entertainment.
right. Everybody goes through that. I mean, you know, um, weird side note, I've got my father passed away 3 years ago today. And so, yes, no,
Oh
it's
man,
it's okay. I mean, but I was thinking about my dad and his success. My dad was a pretty successful guy and worked just insanely hard. Like I wish, even when I worked the hardest I ever worked was in the band, period, because it was something that I wanted more than anything in my life at the time, and so I was willing just to give up all my time, all my energy, all my passion, you know, all name the emotion, everything was thrown into that. And my dad was kind of that way too when he was younger. Um, and I remember talking to my dad, shortly before he passed away, and he lived with a bunch of regret that I wish that he was never able to that he was never able to lift off of him, because he felt like he missed, watching me grow up and my sister, and um, and he was kind of absent for a lot of that stuff. But because of my dad, I was able, my dad bought me my first guitar and my last guitar. So, yeah, and so
man.
my dad never understood the whole musician thing. He grew up poor, and not poor. He grew up. His parents worked super hard. My grandparents, but um, my grandmother didn't graduate from high school. She went to 8th grade, and that was it. And um, my grandfather went to high school, and then he was a lineman for a power company, and um, so dad came from very blue collar people, and so he's like, you can be a lawyer, you can be whatever you want to be. Why do you want to be this?
Yeah, why do you want to do this? My parents, my mom thought it was, or my dad thought it was a throwaway job. That's what he called. Why do you want to do this
Mm-hmm.
throwaway job? Like, where's your plan B or your plan C or your
Mm-hmm.
real job
Yeah,
plan? And I said, this is my real job, Pop. I don't
yeah.
think he
My
ever got that.
my dad finally got it, but kind of in a way that you would expect, like our parents to get it, which was, yeah,
That
which
generation.
was we played at a Edge Fest in Dallas. And this was right when the first record's blowing up, and we're on MTV, and it's all this stuff's going on, and long story short, we played during our set. I kind of half incited, not a riot like I got accused of doing in New York City at one point, but I said, and you've been to shows at the amphitheater in Dallas. It was originally called Starplex, and
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called now. But so I mentioned to people in a very rock and roll way, people on the lawn should come down to the front. And so some things ensued. They gates
And so
were
they did come
gates
down.
right. Gates got ripped off of
The fences
things. Yeah,
down.
and so it was kind of, so my dad kind of saw the control and the sort of the mob. Saw his son kind of whipping these people, kind of taking advantage of this mob thing. And after the show, he was like, "Man, you got your shit together." But it was only because at that point he knew I was making a living, and when there was some commercial success to it, he knew that because when I was playing in clubs in Dallas, and dad would come out to shows, but he loved it because my dad was a younger guy at the time. He was in his in the 80s when I was playing. He was in his dad's in his 40s, and he has come out and he was single. And so, and so all the girls are around and he's buying drinks for my friends and girlfriends and all that stuff. And he loved it. He had a great time. But he was hoping that was going to be a phase, I think, or he was like, oh, at some point Jeff's going to realize that, this isn't going to pay the bills and he's going to do something else. But, it just happened differently. And I'm so, I don't know, maybe I can't imagine sometimes, and you've gone through this too, maybe, where you're like, man, if I wouldn't have done this, I would have, maybe if I'd have gone to law school, maybe, maybe I wouldn't have struggled so much in my life, or, you think about those things and then, but then I wouldn't I wouldn't be doing this with you now. I mean, friends like Chuck Stickle, a mutual friend. And, I met Chuck long before I lived in Oklahoma City. And Greg Kozak, who was, he was one of the first radio interviews I ever did was on KMYZ in Tulsa. And Greg was doing afternoons.
3 to 7. Yeah.
And I always remembered his name because there was a guy out in Phoenix, a guy named Dead Air Dave, that had the long hair, long blonde hair, and the kind of a skinny, demeanor, and like this guy. And so I accidentally called Greg Dave. And he kept, and I was like, oh man, I'm sorry. I'm going to remember you're the anti-Greg Brady. And that's how I always remembered his name. And so every time I saw him, but even before I had moved to Oklahoma City, I always remembered his name. And so I wouldn't have known these crazy, interesting people, and got to travel the world a couple times. And, I met my wife indirectly from being in the band, my current wife. And so there's like, again, I can't imagine life without her, and I can't imagine life without my daughter and my stepson. And then I live, my residence is in Oklahoma City, but I'm in St. Louis a bunch. And, and my wife's family lives in Washington, Missouri. And I know this isn't that interesting to people. Where I'm going with this is it's in a county that my great my great grandfather, and I have his naturalization papers. That's where that old homestead was, in this county. And so it's like weird, like, because I was in the band, it actually brought me full circle back to literally, I drive within 5 miles of where the first shell American citizen had his homestead. And it's just weird. Like, I think about all that stuff. It's like, if I would have made different decisions, I don't know that I would have been able to kind of go back home. And, but I may have never left Jefferson City, Missouri. So I don't know about that. Yeah. So,
as humans, we tend to want to focus on the one or two things we could have done differently instead of the thousands that we did right. Like I've realized that myself. I've had the same conversations. If I would have done this, tweaked this offer or said this in a conversation, maybe things would have turned out differently. And then I'll wake up and I'll be like, yeah, but things turned out pretty solid as they were.
Yeah,
You know.
it's really crazy too. I was up this last weekend, and I was up in St. Louis, and as I came back to Oklahoma, you get this, because I moved my daughter back into school. I had to be in town and help her move in and stuff, and so, but the weekend before, my wife and I we went over to some friends that we have up in St. Louis, where they live in the Illinois side of St. Louis, and my wife met this other baseball mom, because both my stepson and her and the other person's son, they played on a perfect game all-star team in St. Louis last year, and they met each other and they hit it off, and they're like, and all, and it's like, but those those parents were total Gravity Kills fans, and the other mom, like, there's pictures of on the internet of her at shows and her husband, and they come to the shows and all this stuff, and it's just weird, like, again, like the life that I've kind of moved to, it's like you still can't, maybe it's because it's St. Louis or something, but I can't really, there's always like this Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation between what I did in the band and my personal life there now, but but it's like, it's really cool. And I don't, you think about regret, I've got professional regrets, but man, I love being baseball dad, and I love being a girl dad, and I was a much better dad than I ever was, as far as, I feel like I was a better dad than virtually anything else that I'd ever done in my life. And I wasn't a perfect dad, but man, I love being a dad.
Oh yeah, me too. It's literally where my joy in my life comes from.
Yeah, and I love, being married was tough when I was in Gravity Kills. Managed to stay married through the whole thing, and then after the band, and it was I was pretty lost for a while. You wrap your identity up in one thing, and it's the thing you wanted the most. I grew up wanting two things. I either wanted to be a rock star, or I wanted to be the shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals, and I wasn't good enough. I wasn't ever going to be the shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. So I got to do pretty much the one thing in life that I wanted to do. I had my shot, had a nice little run, and then when it was over, man, I'm glad I moved out of St. Louis, because I didn't have to deal with, what happened to you guys? Why'd you guys quit?
Yeah. Every day people want to know. Walk us through it one more.
Yeah, I didn't have to deal with any of that, because people didn't really know. Although when I started working in Tulsa some, and but I became like Chuck Stickle, for instance. He and I were friends, and sort of in spite of me being in the band, and you've had, because Chuck's a guy that you can have a conversation with him about anything. And so, I think that now, I don't know, man, I'm just in a good place, and, I'm lucky in my life that I'm at a point in my life where I take the amount of work that I want to take, and, because I just want to keep the lights on, keep things going. And I don't really, again, it's like I'll talk about band stuff with you, but man, it seems, I was telling the guy when I did the interview with the Mortal Kombat guy, I was like, this doesn't even seem real anymore, because I'm so far removed from it.
It's like a chapter you read a long time ago.
Yeah, it's like, you don't even know who that person is really anymore, because you're so removed from even, maybe the way I thought, or the way I acted, or the way, what drove me, what my motivations in life, what got me motivated, what kept me motivated, and in that business too, and same as your business, it was tough to plan for 5 years down the road. You know, it would have a 5-year plan. 5-year plan. You know, I'm supposed to be on the road for the next 4 months. I got to go back in the studio and then come up with a record. And it's like, you're not like, you know, and again, there are people I'm sure that can do it. You know, I'm sure now there's some guy in a band somewhere that's got his Roth IRA going, you know, and he's got it together.
Investment account.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, and all that stuff. And he's looking, oh, yeah, when I'm 60 and I'm doing all that stuff, you know, but that's also why, I mean, there's bands out there, you know, there's still, you know, and I guess, you know, and I've had this discussion with my wife. I don't know how I would react if we would have been the kind of band that would have had like, you know, that would have been sort of had more kind of mainstream kind of songs, you know, that we were going to be playing, you know, Skyline Theater at Osage Casino, you know, or Windstar or whatever. And, you know, you're going to go out and make your $50,000 guarantee a night. You're going to play, you know, you're going to play 60 shows a year. And, I don't know, you know, part of me is like, yeah, it could be cool. But there's a big part of me that's like, dude, you're so far removed from what it's like to have to travel all the time and, you know, and sleep in hotels and search out places to do your laundry when the venue didn't have laundry, and you're eating bad food and you're just tired all the time and you're beat up and so.
But we thought it was glamorous.
Oh man.
When you're 22 years old, you think that's the life you want to, one of the reasons I've been at the casino, because I don't have to travel.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I wake up in my own bed. I know where the food I want to eat is. I don't have to wonder where the fluff and folds are or if a car breaks down or whatever. We thought it was glamorous at age 25.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if I guess for me, I guess the glamorous part was, you know, you kind of got seduced a little bit by the fame part of it, you know, you know, doing the MTV specials. I mean, we did all of them. We did Schoolhouse Rock. I did a Rock the Vote special. We did 120 minutes. We did segments on Headbangers Ball in Europe. Funniest television story. We were in Europe and we had taken a cruise ship from Stockholm to Helsinki. And then we were going to pick up and play in Helsinki. And so you're up all night. These cruises are like party cruises. I mean, these people are up and they're just dancing all night and it's drinking and all this crazy stuff. And I hung out with my LD who was recovering. And so, you know, and I couldn't, you know, it's like we were going to be playing in Helsinki basically that day because it's after midnight. You're rolling
like 14 hours.
Right. And so we're rolling across the Baltic just watching all this stuff, and it was crazy. And so we get to Helsinki, we get in the hotel, you know, the crew, they go straight to the venue, and you're running off rented backline for the most part anyway when you're in Europe, because, you know, the power's different and it's all this stuff. And maybe if there's certain things we had to take, you know, maybe it was a couple racks or whatever. So the guys are at the venue, we're at the hotel. I take a shower and it was like, I got to go meet the tour manager. It's Kurt, my drummer. I was like, dude, I got to go meet Rick down in the lobby because we got to go to it's like the MTV, but it's not MTV, but it was in Finland. And so he's like, cool. And so he's like hanging out in the room, and he finally takes a shower, gets out of the shower, turns on the TV, and me and our keyboard player like live on television, like in, you know, he's turned the TV on, he's flipping channels, all of a sudden, you know, he sees my ugly mug on, and it was just like, you know, it had to be a little bit surreal, but, you know, so we're doing all this TV and, you know, all that kind of crazy stuff. And that was, you know, we did far more like television, like, you know, late night shows in Europe. Mm-hmm. You know, we did 3 or 4 over there. And the biggest one was Canal Plus which is the biggest late night television show in France. and I don't know the name of the show, but Canal Plus is like, it's a big network there. And so you're doing all that kind of stuff. So, so you're in Paris the next day, and there are people, because, people tune into this show specifically for the music segment. And so you're walking around Paris getting recognized, and you hadn't even played there yet. It was just like super weird and cool, and you kind of get seduced by some of that stuff. But so now I guess, I'm just in a place. It's just like, again, I can't imagine who that guy was. I can imagine, but I just don't. Like, I think about all that stuff going on, and I'm like, was it just a dream? Was it just, was it a different construct? Matrix construct that I was in for a while, and now I'm in this one, and because I remember all that stuff, but it's, it was so long ago. And you and I talked about that when we were talking about doing the podcast. It's like, how maybe different our lives are. And I do have to mention, us talking about guys kind of not, sort of not having a support network. There's going to be a lot of people that listen to, hopefully that watch this podcast, that they won't know who this guy is. But there's a guy in Tulsa, his name's Tom Green, and you probably know him. And, he did D-Fest, and, he's kind of still an independent promoter. He's owned, clubs and restaurants, but he just out of the blue every once in a while would just call me. And we were never like really good friends, never close or anything. And he'll just out of the blue just call me. And he made it a point to tell me, he's like, yeah, man, I just think sometimes guys just, they don't have people that just call and say, hey, how are you really doing? And he's one of those guys. And I just, I felt like if I don't mention him, based on, what you and I had talked about or had typed back and forth to each other previously, if I don't mention him, I don't, because he's a guy that really made me start thinking about a lot of that stuff. And I haven't talked to him in a while, but, he's made me do some things that I've, there was a guy recently, it's been in the past 6 months, you have a lot of friends on Facebook that maybe they know of you because of, you don't know, you've been in the entertainment business for so long, and somebody knew you, and they know that. And so you've got these, there was a guy, and he was like he was a fan of the band, and I'm not going to mention his name, but he made a post on Facebook that, and you've seen these posts, that, like, it scared me because he was done. And he obviously had nobody to talk to or reach out to, because if you're on social media crying for help, you are, at least the perception you have is that you are alone. And I DM'd the guy, said, here's my number, call me. And he said, thanks, but I'm okay. I think I'm gonna, I'm just freaking out a little bit. I was like, no, call me.
Yeah.
And so I get this call. And so now, he'll text me every once in a while, text him every once in a while. We, while he was kind of felt like he was going through it, I would just call him every once in a while. Hey, man, things all right. And, and I just don't think, maybe, and it's not just guys too. I mean, if you see somebody on the internet reaching out, that are posting on social media, and they're crying for help, they're in a dark, bad place.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess maybe the message that I would have for anybody who's going to listen to this, and again, based on the premise that you and I talked about, is sort of, maybe we don't spend enough time. We spend a lot of time talking at each other, but we don't spend a lot of time talking to each other and listening to each other. You're talking about celebrity culture, which may be the only, aside now from politics, which is apparently a 2-team sport. Celebrity culture is maybe the last ubiquitous culture that we have in our country. Like,
Yeah.
and even that's niche to a certain degree. But if I say the name Taylor Swift, for some people they're like, she's awesome, and then some people are like, oh no, it's NFL season and I got to see this chick on. And it's like, we're so off in our own headspaces as human beings now. We should be more connected. You've had this conversation, I'm sure, with a million people. We're far more connected than we've ever been in our lives, and far more disconnected emotionally than we've ever been as a society. And and if there's
Man, I will tell you, Greg Kozak. So I met Kozak 2 days before my 14th birthday. And I remember he and I talking about, he said, man, if somebody's hurting and they're a human being, it shouldn't be that hard to understand that somebody's going through a rough time. And probably after my brother was killed when I was 19, Greg kind of became that big brother to me. And fast forward to when we used to have this breakfast thing, Chuck and Greg and Brent Douglas from KMOD and I would get together. And Greg said, you're always the one who reaches out and says, hey, let's get together. It's been too long. Let's do that. And I said, it's because of what you had said. And you referenced it earlier. We're doing a lot of hearing, but we're not really listening. And I try to say each day, I try to carve out 5 or 10 minutes just to reach out to somebody I hadn't and say, man, what's going on? How are you doing? Not what are you doing? How are you doing? And I've managed to discover friendships that I wouldn't have thought were there just by saying, hey man, what's going on? Case in point, you and I chatting now. I love the fact that on Facebook, because I'm of the generation, that's my primary social media, you're always positive. Even when people come out swinging, you're always able to stay positive. And even if it's, man, more power to you, you're welcome to your own thoughts or your own opinions, but this is kind of where I'm coming from. And that's why I just reached out and I said, man, this guy is somebody that I think would be a positive influence. I mean, obviously a good conversationalist, but somebody that I'd want to hang with and actually, have a real conversation.
Man, we get, we could go in this direction, but man, we just live in a time now, and I'm, at the risk of sounding like a guy that's, yelling at the sky, or get off my lawn, or however you want to paint, whatever brush you want to paint, paint me with. I think that, the ability to people are so ready, so opinionated, and we get this in music a lot too. I mean, Chris, I'm old enough to remember Chris Christopherson being a Hollywood star, being an outlaw, being in that, being thrown into that arena with, Waylon and, Willie Nelson and those guys, that, those guys live fast and hard and have better stories than you or I probably, could ever,
put together.
And, but now everybody's so damn ready to, that's what the internet is. That's what social media is become is, this is my opinion. And because I have that opinion, there is no other opinion.
Yes.
And I, and I guess I could be that way too, I suppose. I think there's certain things that I believe that, maybe immutable facts or something, maybe, but man, and especially in the entertainment industry, people are so ready to knock people down for whatever reason. And I can't wrap my head around, if you hate an artist or an actor or the president, and politics is a little bit different because, the cost of eggs affects everybody. Music's different. Music doesn't affect everybody. If I listen to a certain band, you listen to bands I've never heard of. I listen to bands you've never heard of. We've listened to a lot of bands that we've both heard of. You have opinions. You have strong opinions for likes. You like certain bands that I probably don't like as much, and vice versa. Man, but I'm very careful anymore, and I didn't used to be this way. It took, I can't say I was this way when I was in my 20s. I think it was just, band, you're in a band and you're competitive, and music's not a competitive sport, by the way, and you can quote me on that. That people, they forget that, music is it's an incredibly personal thing. And, there are bands like have caught a lot of grief, man. I was telling a story about Creed the other day, and, I was talking about hanging out with those people in Illinois like last weekend, and they were talking about they went to see Creed, and I think and they were telling me, and I don't know them that well, but they were kind of like, ooh, waiting for me to push back or something. And I tell the story about Creed. We played a show with them. First time I ever saw Creed. We were both playing Point Fest in St. Louis. This was in 1998. We closed the show. We were not the hometown hero, but at the time, we were selling a lot of records. Our second record had just come out. We had, things were doing, at the time, things were going, looked like, we could kind of go with this for a while. Green Day and Foo Fighters were also on the bill. And so the Post-Dispatch was the newspaper in St. Louis. They did a review of the show, and they list all the bands. And how they talked about Creed was the only misfire of the day, Creed. Then they went on to just, demolish Creed in their review. Well, Creed on that record, it was the first record. That record sold more copies than you took every other band on the bill, including Green Day, the Foo Fighters, there's us. I'd have to see who else was on that bill. Creed sold more records than if you took all the other bands combined their sound scans for that. Sound scan, by the way, for some of you, that's how many, it's how they tally how many records you sold. Collectively, all those bands didn't sell as many records as that first Creed record for that album cycle. So I was like, I tell people, man, anybody who can sell, their debut record sells 8 million copies. They're doing something way better than I did.
That's not by accident. Yeah.
And, and so, those bands like, I watched the Nickelback documentary as well. And Nickelback catches a lot of hate too. And I was like, man, and I can remember I was over in Europe. I was over doing press for 3 weeks before our last record came out. And this is in early 2002 when, Nickelback's second record was coming out. And if people, and I'm going to sound like a Nickelback fan all of a sudden, or, but the reason I remember all this is because in the States, that second Nickelback record debuted at number 1. Mm-hmm. The first record never broke the top 100.
Didn't even make the top 100, and the second one came off at number 1.
And so again, and I was in Europe at the time when, This Is What You Remind Me, I don't know what the name of that song, if that's the name of this, that could be the name of the song. But I remember because I was over, and even in Europe, that song was blowing up. Even like I'd be like, I was traveling in Europe through the week, and then I would go back to London on the weekends. And I was hearing the song on television, and and I got back to the States, and I don't know that I'd ever heard of Nickelback. Maybe, I actually had, I think, because they were on Roadrunner, and there was a guy that worked for TVT that had come over from Roadrunner, and I remember, and at some point, a guy named Mark Abramson, and he'd mentioned to me, it's like, oh yeah, these guys are going to be huge, and I'm like, wow, whatever, Nickelback, who's that, or whatever. And so I get back in the States, and the record comes out, it's like number 1. I was like, oh my god. And so anyway, I guess the point of all that is, if there's somebody doing something, it's one thing to be in a band, and if let's say you could be Jack White or you could be Nickelback. There would be some people, maybe, I would gravitate more being Jack White. Maybe you're coming into town, you're playing Kane's Ballroom in Tulsa, you're playing Tulsa Theater, or you're doing tours. You're not out doing arenas, and it's, but, you're kind of being able to do things on your own terms. You don't have the same pressure at radio that a band like Nickelback would have, those kinds of things. But being Nickelback wouldn't be bad either.
Oh man, I can't believe I'm having to pause this conversation again, but this is just way too much goodness to try and trim it down. We're out of time this week, but join us next episode for the conclusion of our conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Jeff Scheel on the 11%.